As I mentioned earlier, Ken Schubenstein is an MD as well as a CFA, and he has already sort of alluded to some of the way he thinks about the world, and I appreciate that Dean Zeidhammel challenged us to pay attention to how our speakers think, not just what they say, but how they think, how they frame the world. And what Ken is going to talk to us about now is a bit of what we call in academics the behavioral finance area. And stay tuned, because not only is he going to talk about the psychology of human misjudgment, but he's also going to give us his a best idea. So you might want to take notes on this. And so without further ado, let me give you Ken Schubenstein of Spencer Capital Management.
Thank you. And the good news and the bad news. The bad news is, when I designed this talk, I thought that I had an hour to an hour and a half. The good news is that I don't, so I've had to make it much shorter. And we'll be able to get to the cocktail hours and the food quicker. I'm going to talk a little bit today. I'm going to introduce who I am and how we do things at our firm. Then I'm going to talk about cognitive biases. How do we take information and make decisions, which has broad applicability to personal and professional decision making. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about an idea that we like. And I'm going to go through that part a little bit quickly because we don't have a lot of time, but there's a lot of slides that will be available on the web, and certainly anybody can contact me if they have follow-up questions. So I started Spencer because as a kid I started investing. I come from a family of all doctors and scientists, and after our money being lost rather quickly by different brokers, I got interested early and picked it up as a hobby. And due to the fact that my parents had an inappropriate amount of confidence in me, let me take over managing our family money when I was in junior high school. Luckily, the growth curve of my not knowing anything to knowing something was sort of correlated nicely with one of America's great bull markets, which covered up a lot of my early mistakes. And also, being exposed to Berkshire Hathaway and value investing as sort of an intellectual construct helped as well. At Spencer, we look for things with asymmetric payoffs, where if we're wrong, we'll get our capital back over our time frame, which is 3 to 5 years. And if we're right, we get doubles or triples. The key thing about the way we invest, though, is that we take 2 types of risk. And this is the part where it's simple to say, but not at all easy to do. We take timing risk and we take volatility risk. And I think that in the context of what's going on in the world today, that's particularly important. One, because I think we need to expand our timeline. I recently, for the last couple of years, I've been saying typically our ideas work out in sort of 2 years to 3 years, and we try to have about a 3-year timeline. History suggests, and a lot of the great investors over the last 200 years have talked about, you need a 5-year timeline, and certainly in this market, that is more true than ever. Also, the volatility, which is emotionally and cognitively difficult to deal with, creates these great opportunities, but the severe volatility we are experiencing makes it even more difficult to do so. So even though one could argue that for a very long-term investor, it is safer now to invest than it was a few years ago, it certainly feels much worse. Our research process, as I talked about on the panel, is we try to think of a thesis, come up with a strategy to collect data that will refute or support the thesis, collect the data, and then analyze it and iterate this process to understand it better. We also eat our own cooking. My family and a lot of our friends and relatives are in the fund, and that's good for aligning incentives. And as we'll talk about, incentive-caused biases are a big problem and in life in general and worth considering. And just a few things about how to thrive in a bear market. I've invested through a couple of bear markets, and this is by far the strangest and most difficult of the ones that I've personally encountered. And it sounds like from reading history and studying as much as I can, it's also a pretty challenging one from that context as well. So the 3 things that I find helpful over investing in a lifetime is having strong hands. That means either not having leverage or having low amounts of leverage, or having leverage that is fixed rate, very long-term, and non-recourse. So you can hold on to your position, so you control the decisions about timing of entering and exiting an investment. Having a head full of research ideas is also helpful. One of the great things and fascinating things about the investment business is that it's accretive. What we learn and study today can help us in future investment situations. And so work done in the past just builds and builds to help us deal with the ever new uncertainties. And lastly, just you need heart. It is hard to invest in a bear market. It's really hard to invest right now where the best managers I know are putting money to work and quickly losing 10, 20, or 30% on the capital they're putting out. So to go through behavioral finance a little bit, to frame it, there's two types of cognitive biases. They're innate and they're acquired. The innate ones are Darwinian. Our brains have evolved in very specific ways to deal with stimuli reaction patterns. And these are so powerful that even when we take university students or groups of professionals at associations and tell them we're going to test, and the scientists who do this tell the audience or the participants, we're going to test you for these biases, try to overcome them, they can't. That's how strong the Darwinian cognitive biases are. And it's worth remembering that as we encounter situations, because there are tools that can help, although not fully mitigate this problem. The acquired ones, as I mentioned during the panel, are the ones we pick up through our lifetime. Going through extreme events definitely reframes us. If you think back to the people maybe in your family or others you know who went through either the Depression or some of the atrocities of World War II, that framed how they made decisions for the rest of their lives, even as it got further into the distant past for them.